Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend John Opalewski, and today a special surprise guest. John, how are you?
Hey Jim, I'm doing good. I'm so excited about what God's been up to and what He's been doing, and I'm also really looking forward to a few days off because I'm a little tired about as a result of what God's been up to and God's doing.
Yeah,
Um, but doing really well. It's good to be with you today.
good, good, good. Well, why don't you introduce us to our guest today? He's not new to our audience, but he
Mhm.
needs an introduction nonetheless.
Yes, we are so excited to have Josh Spurlock back with us. Josh has been on the podcast multiple times, and
Yeah,
every time that we've had him on, I have learned something new. And it's not just something little. There's been something that's been really paradigm shifting. And I'm not trying to set you up here today,
yeah. So
Josh,
do it again, Josh, will you? That'd be great.
for the expectation that that'll happen again. But but not only me, Jim, I know that you've expressed the same thing, and so have our listeners and watchers of how much they appreciate these conversations with Josh. So, Josh, we're so excited that you're with us. Welcome back to Leading from Alignment.
Man, thanks for having me. I just enjoy hanging out with you guys and love your audience and those that you provide support and care to. So really feels like a privilege to get to spend some time with you and speak an encouraging word, hopefully.
Yeah,
Right on.
awesome.
We
So,
should we should do this from a fishing boat next summer. We should just go to some lake in Canada
Yes. Count me
and just
in.
hang out. Yeah,
Count me
and we
in.
we call it fellowship. Three fellas in the same ship. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
I like that idea. That's good.
so Josh,
Count
you
me
have
in.
this incredible ministry that God has birthed in your heart, and not just birthed in your heart, but it's come to fruition.
Mhm.
Called My Counselor Online. And I know that
Yes.
we've talked a little bit about that each time you've been with us, but I was wondering if you could do a couple of things. Just catch us up a little bit about what
Yeah.
My Counselor Online does, the audience it serves, and maybe some of the things that have been going on since we talked last with ministry.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So, yeah, my counselor online, faith-based mental health delivered online. It's something that God gave us to do in the kingdom back in 2017, back before online counseling was cool. In fact, it felt a lot like Noah building an ark in the desert with friends going,
Yeah.
"Why in the world would anybody want to do online counseling?" And then COVID came along, and suddenly all counseling everywhere was being done online as in person
Yeah.
meetings got shut down. And we kind of stood back in awe and feeling humbled and grateful that the Lord had led us down this path and that we had listened to his lead in that and really had a couple of year head start on learning how to
Right.
provide care to folks online. And so that's kind of what we're still up to, is coming alongside pastors and missionaries and church planners, and they're spread out around the country and around the world, and providing support to them and the congregations that they lead by being a reliable place for them to refer folks on their staff or for their own families or for their folks they lead, to be able to receive good quality mental health that's consistent with the scriptures, and kind
Uh,
of use the the needs of people through that lens as well. So it's been a lot of fun, a lot of work, a lot
Been a
of
lot
fun.
of fun. Love it. It's funny when you're doing what you're supposed to do, right? When you know you're in the right place
Yes,
at the right time,
yes.
in any expression of the goodness of God, it's fun. You
Yeah,
know?
I mean, ministry. I mean, I know this audience understands that when I say that it's
Yeah.
good. It's not without struggle, and it's
Sure.
not
Oh
without
yeah. Yeah.
suffering at times. But
Yeah.
all the work that the King gives us to do has struggle and suffering that's a part of it, and it has great joy that comes with it as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Now we've talked about it because we've been doing this for a while. This is the third or fourth time, Josh. This is the third time I think I've been
Yeah,
involved in
I
this,
think
but
something
maybe
like
the fourth
that.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, we talk about there was a pre-COVID dynamic of leadership, in the
Hmm.
church. Then when there was the crises, so that in the crises, leadership dynamic. And then there's kind of like, hey, life's back to normal. Well, not for the people that I know, right? So there's a leading through, and then there's a leading out of crises that creates issues. So what trends are you seeing right now? Where we're at in this. I know that COVID is behind us, but some things have changed, and now maybe we're just starting to kind of digest as leaders what we're doing now. So what are you seeing as the number one, the trends of that leadership? What are you talking about when people call you now?
Yeah. So, not to use cliche terms, like
Yeah,
new normal and living with kind of
yeah,
pandemic and things of that nature. But I think there's a reality of things are different in a permanent kind of way. That some things are
yeah,
returning, some things are familiar, and certainly humans have gone through struggles and pandemics and things and events throughout history. But it's the world is a different place, and
yeah,
our country is a different place, and the expectations that people have shifted. And so
yeah,
there's a settling in and a grieving, that things are not just going to go back to the way things
mm-hmm.
were, that there are
Mm-hmm.
some things, for better or worse, that are going to continue to be different. And we've got to
Right.
learn how to come to terms with that.
Wow.
Can you go deeper into that? The word grieving. This is
Mm-hmm.
what I know of grief. It happens when it happens, how it happens, the way it happens,
Mm-hmm.
and those who choose not to express it end up kicking their neighbor's dog 2 years from now and not knowing why they did it. So
Yes.
it's one of those. I'd rather not feel it, and I don't seem to
Mm-hmm.
have control over it. I'm in line at the grocery store. I hear a
Mm-hmm.
song that reminds me of my lost loved one, and I begin to
Mm-hmm.
grieve right there next to the Snickers bars and scare people in line next to me. Right. So
Yes.
what do you mean by that? What does the process of grieving look like in this dynamic?
It's 100% of all that and
Okay.
more. And the and more really has to do with the the different kinds of grief that we experience, or grief
Okay.
scenarios. We tend to, when we think about grief, think about kind of the loss of a loved one,
Mm-hmm.
sudden death of somebody we care about, and that's kind of the traditional, that's grief, right? Someone I cared
Yeah.
about is no longer here, and I have grief around that. But grief is an everyday part of life. Grief is
Okay.
about loss. Loss is big and loss is small. And that, whenever we experience disappointment, there's loss. Right? A hope disappointed.
Right.
That I came to a ministry position and I thought that this is what it was going to be, and it turned out to be something different than what I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was going to be when I came. There's a loss of that dream. There's a loss of
Right.
that vision of what it was going to be. There's losses in friendships and relationship, and how I thought somebody was going to be there for me and they
Mm-hmm.
weren't. And maybe I still have the relationship with the person. They're not dead or gone, and haven't necessarily written me off in a way that maybe I'd think about losing them. But there was a expectation or a hope, what I thought was going to be, that is not anymore. And I've lost something in that. And there's grief that's a part of those losses. And if it's not grieved, if we don't acknowledge that loss, we don't allow ourselves to feel and name the pain that's a part of that, and allow ourselves to move through those feelings, and that there's a cumulative effect to them.
Okay.
And so there's, death by 1,000 cuts, as it were. There's burnout by 1,000 griefs ungrieved, 1,000 losses ungrieved that we can
Mm-hmm.
experience, where the cumulative effect of all these things not grieved then leads to burnout, leads to depression, leads to anxiety and throwing in the towel. And so it's really the 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 small things, the small losses, are more likely to lead to burnout than the big ones.
Wow.
Interesting.
They're less likely to be acknowledged and processed through, and cumulatively they get us into a bad spot.
You know, that's such an interesting thought, because I think sometimes we flip that, right, Josh, where we think it's the big stuff
Yeah.
that's going to do us in.
Mhm.
And I think that's going to lead into the next question I want to ask you. But before I get to that, I'm really curious. Um, I think I know the answer to this, but is it because we trivialize the small things, Josh? We don't count them as important, or hey, everybody's dealing with problems, just get over it kind of mentality?
Yes.
Why do we do that to
Yeah.
ourselves? I guess is what I'm asking.
There's a variety of different reasons. The short answer is that our experiences of life have taught us to do that.
Mhm.
Right? That our experience of life, the important people in our life and our story taught us that was the way to do that. And so that could look like the dismissing or undermining of loss by going, hey, everybody's got problems, as though that means that yours aren't significant or don't matter or shouldn't be acknowledged, aren't important. Or there's a spiritualization of it, that if I was really on point spiritually, then these things wouldn't affect me, they wouldn't matter to me, or that they're carnal in nature, that I would feel a sense of loss either over something financial or over a friend betraying me in some minor way, that I'm being petty if I acknowledge that that hurt, and that
Mhm.
and so I would want to be spiritually immature, and so I can't acknowledge that that actually bothered me, you know. And so that's how we end up dismissing those things in a
Yeah.
way that prevents us from grieving them, so we carry them around.
How do I combat that tendency
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
Yeah.
dismiss that? Could you give us an idea of maybe a good strategy for that?
Yes, yes, absolutely. So one of the best strategies is teamwork it, right? To employ this in the people that are close to us.
Huh.
And this is true of many things, that we tend to be in a pretty individualistic society. And so we want to figure out what's the self-help thing that I can do by myself, just me and Jesus in a prayer closet, not needing or relying on anybody else. But like most things in human health and wellness, as God designed it, we need each other.
Right.
So that means with my spouse and with my friends and those around me, talking about this sort of thing, and being able to go, hey, you know what, Jim, I recognize that I have a tendency to dismiss the losses in my life and not really make
Right.
space to grieve them. And that I could really use some help. When you notice me doing that, just draw it to my attention, you know, just
Mhm.
drawing my attention where maybe I'm minimizing or dismissing or sweeping under the rug, or, failing to acknowledge a loss. And that would be helpful. If we can have that
Mhm.
with each other, those around us can catch it oftentimes quicker than we can. They can see
Mhm.
those defenses that we formed from the experiences of our life kicking in, and we'll go, yeah, that was terrible, but God is good, which is true, but is a spiritualizing of a
Right.
dismissing, not acknowledging the loss that we feel, and
Right.
or whatever form that takes. That the teamwork is exceedingly helpful, and we can be able to pause and go, that's true, Jim. It is, God is good, and this really
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah.
This is really hard what you're
Yeah.
going through. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry that you're going through it.
Right.
And
Right.
acknowledge
Is
that.
that is that I'm sorry that you're going through an important piece too, because now we're sharing that burden. Like
Yes,
you,
bearing one
you shared it
another's
with me, and now
burdens.
it's later. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's what you honed in on, Jim.
Yeah.
Um, it's how we're bearing one another's burdens. And there's fancy neuroscience around. It's really cool. I nerd out about the neurotheology pieces. Paul talks about us bearing one another's burdens. But
Yeah.
we developed this new technology called functional MRI, which means that instead of having to be in like a space tube to have your brain scanned, we can put like this thing on your head and put it on another person's head, and we can watch two brains interaction with each other at the same time.
Crazy.
Very
Yeah.
super cool. But
Yeah.
there's this thing that happens when we're holding an experience and sharing an experience together. There's this limbic resonance that takes place where my brain and your brain synchronize.
Yeah.
And I'm actually sharing in the experience of the grief or the sadness and that together. And you can watch it on a screen if we're wearing functional MRI apparatus, where it changes the experience and allows us to process it in a way that's impossible to do alone.
Mhm.
That we cannot process it without sharing it with another human being. That bearing one another's burdens and allowing others to bear our burdens with us is an essential element.
That's funny, John. I know one of the things that you've said that I've caught on to is a shared burden by definition is 50% lighter. There's four hands carrying the burden, not just two anymore. It's nice when scripture, logic, philosophy come together and science goes, yeah, scripture's right. That this is how this works.
Mm-hmm. And it's intuitive when we think about it with our kids, right? Yeah. So there's these three fancy $40 handles I'll give you. The limbic resonance, limbic regulation, and limbic revision. And this is how we affect each other's brains and our interaction. But this idea of limbic regulation is like with our kids when they're upset. You think about infants, crying or whatnot, and you go and you scoop them up and you pick them up. And with your voice and with your body and with your eyes, and you look in their face, they see that you're there. And they feel felt by you, that the distress that they're experiencing matters to you. And you feel it as a parent in your body, that you're distressed, that they're distressed, and they feel felt, that they are seen and cared for, and it's regulating to the nervous system. And the baby goes limp or kind of, it's okay. We never grow out of that. As adults, we need that same experience with one another, to feel felt, to be seen, to have another nervous system resonate with us is regulating to us.
Josh, you're doing it, man. You're
right.
You're blowing my mind again. This is so.
Neuroscience is kind of cool, I think. I nerd out about this.
But you just said that we never grow out of that need. Man, that is so powerful. And I believe that society, people, whomever, has drummed that thought out of my brain. That I've reached a certain point in my life that I don't need that kind of care. I don't need that kind of community. And man, that just is so helpful and so challenging at the same time.
Think about what a powerful strategy of the enemy that is, right?
Yeah.
To create shame around that. The fact that you need. And that if I were spiritually mature, if I were a grown-up, if I were a real adult, if I weren't a big baby, if I weren't, insecure or whatever, that the enemy is able to use to shame you away from that kind of connection, how that can lend you and cause you to be impotent.
Yeah.
That over time you are disconnected and you're overwhelmed and burdened down by all these unresolved griefs and lose effectiveness in your family and in your church and in your community. It's a strategy of the enemy that we got to be wise to.
Yeah. Josh, I think we're not going to get past question 3 here. This first one, which is fine.
That's how it usually goes with us, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is really, so rich. Cannot wait for our listeners and watchers to hear this. So I'd like to ask you one more, and then would you come back for a second?
I'd love to. I'd love
Okay.
to really enjoy this.
So Jim and I and our team at Converge Coaching has has observed, we've observed a lot of fatigue and burnout among pastors this year. I don't know, maybe more than we ever have.
Mhm.
And you already mentioned that this death by a thousand cuts is contributing to it in a significant way. I'm wondering what else might be contributing to it from your perspective.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think this is one of the most regulating components of it, right? That because of um, the volume of change and loss that people are facing and that the pandemic has caused, the inability to grieve these losses and metabolize them in a healthy way is accelerating and intensifying that burnout and the pace of it, right? That the volume of things to grieve is higher. And so if our capacity for knowing how to grieve and move through those things isn't developed, then we are overwhelmed by the volume that's coming at us, and we collapse under the weight of it.
Right.
I'm just taking that in,
Yeah.
uh, and thinking that through because I think obviously there are some practical things, I think we can do to either be preventive, or, and we usually hit on things like making sure you're getting a day off, that
Totally.
your
Yeah.
paces well, that you're working on your friendships, that you're exercising, that you're
Yes.
all of that,
All
you're
of that.
working reasonable hours. And I
Mhm.
think that's still true. Uh,
Absolutely. No
that's prevented.
substitute for those
And,
things.
and sometimes even it helps if you're burnout to do some of those rhythms.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
with this one, Josh, I have not, and this is just new territory for us, I think. Jim, would you agree that this is just like new
Yeah,
territory for us in a sense?
it is, but what's funny is it's connecting some dots in my own life. It's connecting dots and people that I'm ministering to because we're talking about more than just having the answers to questions. We're talking about
Mhm.
sharing life,
Yeah.
um, feeling connected to, and the larger a church gets sometimes, or the larger a staff gets, the more processes, the more I say bureaucracy almost as a negative, but the more organization that's required, and the less personal it can feel. So somebody having a bad day could easily go undetected in a church of 1,000 people, differently in a church of 10 people. Someone would connect and
Totally.
say, "Are you okay? Like you don't seem like yourself." Versus someone can come and go lonely, come and go broken, come and go suicidal. We may
Mhm.
not even recognize that in a church that has hundreds of people in it. And so by the time somebody says, "I think I need help," boy, they can be really a long ways down the road. So I guess the thought that I have for you is how do we detect in a room that has hundreds or thousands, how do we detect someone that's hurting and create a culture, that doesn't have a cry room in it for adults, you know what I mean? Or doesn't
Mhm.
have
Mhm.
we kind of make fun sometimes of the Twitter environments of work where, yeah, I need a meditation room and I need
Mhm. Mhm.
my lunch paid for and everything needs to be non-GMO and nothing's offensive. That's not really reality for most of the world that we live in. So
Yeah.
how do we create a culture where how are you doing today isn't met by fine, which we
Mhm.
find out later on means freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. It doesn't. It's an acronym for those things. They're not really
Yes.
fine.
Yes.
How do we create a culture on a staff or in a group, or the larger it gets, the harder it gets. So how do you let people know you're in a safe place? It's okay not to be okay here, but it's Sunday morning and there's hundreds of people in the room. How do you accomplish that? Or am I asking too much? That's not going to happen.
Oh, no, I don't think you're asking too much. I think that's part of, how we lean into, how do we be the body more and more, and
Yeah.
how do we
Yeah.
be the body in different contexts? Because you're right. There's different challenges that you're facing in a, congregation of 1,000 versus in a house church where you've
Yeah.
got units. And ideally, small group ministries are intended to bridge that gap. but they can become, if they're not intentional in developing intimacy, they can be, just as superficial in settings as in any. But to answer your question, and how do we facilitate those different kinds of community or those different kinds of interactions, you really have to lead with vulnerability.
Okay.
You really have to illustrate that from engagement. Like, so if I want to set a culture of safety about kind of being real about vulnerable things, I've got to get open and share with that group of people the real stuff that I'm facing. I have to show it.
Right.
I have to take risk. Right. Risk is inherent in vulnerability. If there's no risk, there's no vulnerability. It's impossible, and as Brene Brown will tell you that there's no courage without vulnerability, and that to be courageous means to face and navigate vulnerability invulnerably. And so you have to be willing to be in this space of going, I have a real struggle with minimizing and dismissing the losses that I experience in life. Like, here's the voices that play in my head. Here's the things that I say and I'm prone to do. And I recognize how it keeps me from metabolizing loss. And it causes me to carry those losses around. And it's not good for me or my ministry or my family. And man, I need help with that. And when I say that to you, what does that do for you?
Yeah. And we've all been in a small group, right? Where somebody finally got honest. Yes. And the next hour, everybody got honest because we realized we're in an environment where we can be honest.
Exactly. And it's the only way to convey that. There is no way you can talk to your blue in the face telling people it's a safe place to do that. Yeah. But until you take a risk and put yourself out there and demonstrate that it's a safe place because you put your neck out there in a way that if people that don't respond is going to have an impact. It's a trust fall kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
If it's not going to hurt if people respond poorly to what you just put out there, then you didn't take a risk.
Right.
You hedged your bets. You didn't actually put yourself out there. Like, it's not going to hurt if people drop you in that scenario. You're not being vulnerable.
That's not trust. Yeah.
It's what I hear you saying. And then, Jim, if you could wrap us up, because we're really bumping up against time, is it really starts with leadership. Like, I think I've heard that somewhere before. But isn't it? I think it's true that the people we lead really pick up on what's going on the inside of us and how we share that. They tend to. I think they tend to follow that more than anything else. Maybe we do as leaders, and so
it's called neuroception.
Okay.
Pick back up.
Explain that to us real quick, and then
I
love any word that starts with neuro, because it's like
it's what you're saying is that my nervous system registers what's happening in your nervous system, regardless of the words that you use or what you try to tell me or try to convey or that try to image that you try to pull off. My nervous system is able to register what's happening in your nervous system. And even if I don't have words to describe it and I can't put my finger on what it is, my body knows and responds to it. Can't hide it.
I've never had language to describe that. I've always, not always, I would say the last 5-10 years, I've believed what I just said to be true, but I would tell people, I can't explain it to you, but this is what I'm observing. You've put actual words to it and science to it. And that's so incredibly helpful and powerful, Josh. Thank you so much.
It's funny that you say that, John, that I've never had words for that, because the limbic brain does not have it does not have the capacity for speech. Yeah, it's not verbal. So it does feel, why is this car salesman giving me the creeps? And this one I'd buy 3 cars from. I don't know why.
Neuroception.
Yeah. Interesting. That must help a lot in counseling and pastoral situations.
Totally.
Yeah, right on.
If
well, guys, thank you. Go ahead.
Your nervous system,
Right. Right. Well, Josh, it's you bring a calm into the room.
Mm.
You slow my speech by about 20%. You have really cool hair. That's we don't like that part of you, but everything else is so welcoming in this. And we're grateful for the time you've given us. Would you remind us again if someone wanted to reach out to you or someone in your practice, how would we do that?
Go out and visit mycounselor.online. That's the URL. That's what you plug in your browser, just mycounselor.online, and you will see our information, see our team, and how to connect with us.
And that's counseling for anything. Is that
counseling for anything? Okay. Anywhere.
Right on. Love that. And John, if we wanted to reach out to Converge and say, how do we continue a conversation in this vein? How would we do that with Converge?
It's convergecoach.com. Click on the contact us link, and that allows us to connect with you for 30 minutes. No charge. And if we can be helpful to you, we'll bring one of our team members to help. And if we can't, we'll find somebody who can help you.
That's right. Yeah. We'll keep trying till there is help. Right on.
Right.
Gentlemen, it's been an honor. Thanks so much. And our dear watchers and listeners, thank you for sharing this time. I hope it's been redemptive for you like it's been redemptive for me. I'll be really honest with you. There are some podcasts where I go, man, we got to be out of time by now, and we're not. And others where I find it we're out of time. I'm like, how did that go so fast? I don't know how that worked, but this is one of those that went quickly, and I hope that it's been a blessing to you. And we're praying for you. We're cheering for you. We're with you in this thing as you continue to lead from alignment.